Correcting Brady Goodwin, author of Let There Be Gaslight. The saga continues.
There was a Trinity Radio episode.
Because you guys preach stuff that is like literally unrecognizable to an ancient African.
You know what I'm saying? It's urban apologetics. You know what I'm saying? Showing black dignity with the gospel.
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman. Y'all know what it is, man. Tru-ID Apologetics. You'll be keeping it running here, man. We got a special guest. None other than the Southern assassin, MJ Jackson. What's happening with you, bro?
Oh, just happy to be back on Tru-ID Apologetics, man. Just happy to be kicking it with you. I hate that it's under these circumstances, but you know, Christian apologists have to keep rolling with the punches, you know?
Yeah, man. Facts, man. You know, so obviously what you're referring to, I mean, by this point, I think people on my channel know that we're talking about a former CHH Christian hip hop artist by the name of Brady Goodwin, aka the Phanatik, has put out a book called Let There Be Gaslight. You know, he some months ago he denounced Christianity, and now he's released a book, you know, to the effect of just kind of explaining some reasons as to why he left the faith, man. So, you know, again, the book dropped. I think it was on August 15th, and you know, got a copy of it. You know, read it, and you know, ready to do some responses, man. Been getting these responses going, and not just me, actually. You know what I'm saying? This has been like a multi-channel, episode, whatever response, man. We got all kind of folks involved. BK apologists, Alice McElroy. I know Damon Richardson is going to be in the mix. Let's see, Eli Ayala, of course, Vocab Malone, Dr. Michael Brown. Like we really out here, man. We really out here having a lot of fun with this thing, man. So, but yeah, man, got you out here, MJ, man. Like, I know we want to get into chapter 13, right? For people who've been watching my channel, they know I've been digging into chapter 12. We're going to take a look tonight at chapter 13 of Let There Be Gaslight. You know what I mean? And yeah, man, you know, just share your thoughts. Like, I guess before we actually dig into just the chapter itself, I know you read the book as well, and you know, just kind of share a little bit about your initial impressions, and then we'll just kind of get into, you know, exactly what we're talking about. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I did read the book, and to what you just said, you know, we have engaged in a community-wide project in addressing this, you know, from a community standpoint. And like I said, BK really set the tone with this. But the book really reads autobiographical, right? It reads autobiographical with a lot of polemics sprinkled in through there, a lot of popular source, popular level sources throughout the book and things like that. You know, some of the parts in the book kind of make you feel bad a little bit for the dude. Other parts of it,
I agree. Yeah,
I'm just saying, other parts of it, it feels like he's gaslighting Christians, to be perfectly honest. So, I'm gonna be charitable tonight because he did mention that he has 30 years of ministry. I'm gonna be charitable because that's the Christian thing to do, but at the same time, I'm going to address this based on the level of credentials that the brother said he have. But in this chapter in particular, you know, Brady begins his project of putting forth the idea that the biblical picture is somehow implausible, and he does all this while giving off what he believes to be the fact that God has not spoken, and he's left it up to man to determine what the facts are regarding whether God has revealed himself or not. And so that's kind of the vibe that you get throughout the book as you make your way up to chapter 13. And
Right.
yeah, I can say a little bit more about that, but that's where we at.
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna talk about it, man. We're gonna talk about it because shout out to Chris Samuel, who also was featured in that episode with BK Apologists reviewing this book. I've talked to him about this as well. Is that there are certain pockets of the book where all right, let me say this. I've already issued a disclaimer on my other I guess episodes of reviewing the book. You know what I'm saying? So some of the things I have to say are relatively harsh. You know what I mean? But like you said, I'm not looking at it as somebody who's a newbie to the game, but this is somebody who has put himself out there as having a certain degree of experience in the Christian faith, and learnedness, having graduated from Lancaster Bible and from Westminster. You know what I mean? So this is something where, we're approaching him at the level of rigor, I think, that I would expect for him to be approaching this as well. And so, but there's just some glaring mistakes, in pockets of the book. And for me, in terms of as far as what I read, and I don't think this is an extreme. Personally, I think that chapter 13 is where you see, if not the most, at least some of the most glaring mistakes on Brady's part, and not just mistakes in terms of getting certain things wrong, but also I think just maybe a tunnel vision with respect to the arguments for God's existence, and not really understanding the weight of them and kind of how they work. That's kind of what I was seeing. And so, we're going to get into that. Chapter 13 is all about him trying to tackle the question of, does God exist? Essentially, or at least to push back on, some of the arguments for God's existence, right? So we're going to get into it a little bit. Anything you want to say before we move forward? Or
no, I just want to echo basically what you just said. Is the goal is to be charitable where you can, but like I said, when you're dealing with somebody who says that, hey, I want the smoke, I got the street cred, I got the credentials. Okay.
Right. All right. Okay, if that's what you want to do, brother. We here for it. We here for it. So yeah, man. So I got on the screen here. I think am I messing it up? Okay, there we go. So I want to make sure that I don't misrepresent his position, right? I don't recall where he like outright calls himself an atheist. I think he tries to, I won't say hide his hand. I'm trying to find a better way of saying it, but he just doesn't show his cards, if you will, in terms of where he may be. And it could be just maybe he's an agnostic, and his writing just kind of reflects that. But here on page 295, 296, it says, in just discussing the God question, he says, however, I am not so bold as to claim there is no God. That if he was, then that would make him a classical atheist. But he says, I'm not so bold as to claim there is no God. That is not something that anyone can prove. But if there is a God or gods, then why hasn't he, she, it, they communicated with us by now in some universal and undeniable way? Absent of any evidence for such correspondence, I am forced to question if a creator God does indeed exist, or if instead of the supernatural, perhaps nature is more super than we have given it credit for being, right? So at the outset, I just kind of want to address this here. I find this very interesting. Oh, hit the wrong button there. There we go. Yeah, so at the outset, I find this very interesting, right? Because he's got the words in here, universal and undeniable. I'm saying, why hasn't God, as in he, she, it, or they, communicated with us by now in some universal and undeniable way? And so at the outset of this conversation about the God question, I feel like he sets up a super high bar. I'm saying a super high bar, as in a bar that's higher than really any other region of study, any other region of philosophy, because essentially this question of is there a God is not just a theological question. It's a philosophical question. It's a question that philosophers of all stripes are interested in. And I think that he sets a bar that's higher than one could expect for human beings to epistemically achieve, right? I don't think that it's. I mean, when we look at philosophy, or just as a field in general, I mean, they pretty much deny and argue about everything. like everything is disputable, right? Everything is arguable, right? So if you're looking for some piece of data that's like indisputable of a philosophical sort, because again, God is not like a physical thing that you could discover through the sciences, right? So that's going to put this question in the region of philosophy. And if you're looking at philosophy, if you're looking for some sort of knockdown, undeniable argument or piece of evidence, then you just have to just throw away the whole field of science and just engage in some sort of just real skepticism, like kind of global skepticism about everything. Because that's just not how philosophy works. I'm saying it's not that that, and I'm gonna pass it to you here in a second, but this notion of there being some sort of undeniable piece of evidence, for God is again, I think it's just not epistemically feasible. But nevertheless, that's not to say that you can't have sufficient. You can't have a sufficient means by which God has communicated or shown himself to be real. You can have an argument for God's existence or some piece of evidence that is sufficient to give somebody justification for the belief that God exists, right? And so I don't think that we have to, and I don't think it's even rational to pin this discussion on the undeniable, that which is undeniable. I think that you could simply look for that which is sufficient, that which serves the purpose of giving evidence in favor of the existence of God. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this whole quest for Cartesian certainty, in my opinion, it is really a quest for only the type of certainty, only the type of knowledge or awareness that God has, right? I mean, we see this in the Enlightenment. We see this attitude that says, okay, I'm going to try to be, I'm going to pretend or try to be neutral. And I'm going to try to see if I can verify God without any resources coming from God, right? But Brady, he's inconsistent in my opinion, because he already argued earlier in the book kind of for solipsism, and he said that it's rational to hold that position, right? So this is very, very inconsistent. At the nicest, it's very nice for me to say inconsistent and sloppy at worst, right? But once again, I agree with everything you just said as far as this universal, undeniable. Well, I mean, what about what Romans 1 say, right? And Romans 1 says that God has made what can be known about him available and evident to everybody, right? In Acts, it says that that God had raised Jesus from the dead, and that was confirming, right, who God is, and that he's going to judge everybody by that one man. But back to Romans 1 real quick. Is it possible that people can take what God has revealed about himself and twist it and even exchange it for a lie and be given over to a reprobated mind? So I number one, Brady, I hope I didn't call him Vody. I don't know why I keep getting Vody in my head.
Yeah, that's a whole different.
But number one, Brady is contradictory in his book. I mean, he seems to think that it's rational to hold to the fact that he cannot demonstrate that other minds exist, yet he feels justified in assuming that they do. But at the same time, he demands this universal, undeniable evidence of God, undeniable. That's the big key. But even from the Christian worldview itself, people can take what they can take God's revelation and twist it and even exchange it. And get rid of it and cast it off. That's what people can do. So this whole undeniability number one, he doesn't even stick to it in other areas of his epistemology. And then this number two is just, as a Christian, as a former Christian, he should know that it is deniable. I mean, Jesus did miracles in front of the Jews, and they denied that he was the Messiah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. Actually, funny enough, just for the sheer comedy of it, one of my favorite passages is where I think it was the Pharisees, like Jesus had raised somebody from the dead. I guess it was Lazarus or whatever, and it was like, all right, man, let's go kill him. So he just he raised the dude from the dead. Like I mean, think of what kind of response is that? You know what I mean?
Wow,
it's so ridiculous. You know what I mean? But it shows I think it just kind of shows the just the hardness of heart of man. Which actually kind of takes me to my other point. I think that could we ask the question of, could God have good reason for ordering the world in such a way that those evidences that point to him are nevertheless, there's some room for us to deny it. Could God do that? Well, I think that he could, right? I think that he could. Maybe it is the case. I'm thinking about when you think about theodicies, for example, in response to this is akin to, or some of the things that he says is akin to the argument from hiddenness. And I think that, could it be the case that God doesn't want to do all the heavy lifting of drawing us to himself? You know what I'm saying? It's epistemically anyway. I'll just put it that way. You know what I'm saying? Could it be that there's this element of essentially in that wiggle room of deniability, there's this opportunity for an exercise of the will, you know what I'm saying, to incline towards, God and his truth. You know what I'm saying? I think so. I think from a soul building standpoint, it's meaningful and valuable for somebody to exercise their will to be in relationship with one another. And so by not bogarting us in such a way with information that, where there's just no way to deny, God creates such an opportunity, for those who would, incline themselves toward him. I think that's a very real possibility. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think, God could have sufficient reason for giving, again, I'll use that word sufficient. And, God could have morally sound reasons for providing mankind with sufficient evidence, while at the same time leaving room for a person to exercise their will to deny him. You know what I'm saying? And in so doing, God creates an atmosphere wherein a person can, in some sense or another, exercise their will to enter into relationship with him. And I think that could be a more fuller relationship. So, anyway, there's different directions that people could go. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, we can say that the stakes are pretty high with the God question. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, this notion of some sort of like undeniability, I think really strains what human beings are epistemically capable of. And in so much as that's the case, it's just irrational to hold such to enter into this kind of conversation, with that being like the litmus test, some sort of universality and undeniability,
Mm-hmm.
All right. But it gets better or worse, depending on how we want to look at it. Right. Oh, shoot, I'm skipping them my own notes. Okay. So this one right here, man, I thought this was kind of interesting. And I got some of the words here in red, and I'm hoping that this will make sense to folks, right? So he says, let me make sure I get the right thing here. Give me 1 second here. All right, he says, a strange thing happens when Christians attempt to practice apologetics upon those who have come to question or doubt the existence of a personal God. It occurs when the believing party incredulously asks, if there is no God, then how can you explain blank? Fill in the blank with logic, morality, life, universal laws, or the universe itself. This is ironic because often, that's key, often the believer asking this question has already admonished the doubter that you can't reason your way to God or trust human logic to know him. Yet the believer is appealing to logic when he or she concludes that there must be a God to explain the existence of whatever they have filled in the blank with, end quote. So that's on page 296. So here's the gripe that I have with Mr. Brady here. This dude is broad brushing Christians like a mug, bro. It's like a real subtle sleight of hand. At first he says when Christians, and he doesn't give any qualifiers. He says Christians, as in the totality. When Christians attempt to practice apologetics, ... But then in the next paragraph, he says that he says this is ironic because often the believer asking the question ... So in the first paragraph, he's applying something to all Christians, and in the second he slides it in. It just says often, which should be fine. You know what I mean? Because maybe there you could just say some Christians do this. You know what I mean? But I kind of wonder, and I'm gonna bring up for whatever reason I left it off of this slide here. I'm gonna bring up the remainder of that quote. But in the very next paragraph, he then says something about believers have some particular attitude towards logic. I'm saying where he kind of goes back to labeling all Christians again. But while I'm looking for the rest of that quote, do you kind of see what I'm getting at here, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's talking about two different types of Christians, right? And there are different traditions that really don't think that you can use arguments to show that God exists, right? And I think there's a difference between knowing and showing, and this is being glossed over, hence why I kind of think that this is, I hope this doesn't hurt nobody's feelings, but this is why I think that this book is sloppy, even at the popular level. Because
yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's maybe that's my beef. I feel like the sloppiness in this instance results in labeling Christians in a particular way. Because again, in the first paragraph, he says that a strange thing happens when Christians attempt apologetics. So now he's talking about all Christians. But then he kind of gives us a little more a limited set in the next paragraph where he says this is ironic because often the believer asking this question. So he's got a qualifier in there that was seeing that he's just talking about certain kinds of believers. But then let me read this though, because in the very next on page 296 as well, he then says, after those two paragraphs I just read, he says this: what this shows is that just like Romans chapter 1, Bible believers are not opposed to the use of logic. Rather, they are opposed to logic that does not come to the conclusion they believe should naturally follow. So the question becomes, is it completely logical to reason that there must be a God simply because, generally speaking, you can't get something from nothing? So at the beginning of that paragraph I just read, he says, just like Romans, Bible believers are not opposed to logic, but they, Bible believers, are opposed to logic that does not come to the conclusion they believe should naturally follow. And so I'm saying it's like you go from talking about all Christians, and then you kind of give us a little smaller set, but then you label it all Christians again. You know what I mean? And to me, I know there's nobody in the UA like that. There's nobody in the urban apologetics community that's like that. You see what I'm saying?
I absolutely see what you're saying. Let me also say this. There is such a thing known as fideism, right? And fideism is the view that knowledge of God depends on faith completely. Period. No arguments, nothing like that. Now, I would say that the tradition that he has came out of is not fideistic. It's not. There's also the understanding that with the fall, man's reason has been corrupted. Some people hold that view. I don't hold that view. With the fall, man's use of reason can be corrupted from time to time. The use of reason is what can be corrupted, not reason itself. There's no such thing as man's reason. There's an appropriate use of reason, and then there is an inappropriate use of reason. And it's the inappropriate use of reason that you might find some Christians take issue with.
That's good. I might have you unpack that a little bit. You know what I'm saying? In terms of the inappropriate use of reason. Like, kind of give me an example of where you're going there. That's interesting. That's interesting.
And so when we start talking about reasoning, we talk about what Martin Luther. Martin Luther King.
That's funny.
Excuse me. You might have been named after Martin Luther King. But we talk about the magisterial versus the ministerial use of reason, right?
Okay.
The magisterial reason sees the reasoning process as an end in itself, set above God's revelation to judge it and determine what it should be and what it shouldn't be. The ministerial use of reason sees reason as what would be called a handmaiden to God's revelation, also to theology, things like that. It helps to organize where we can understand certain things. And so when reason is taken out of its proper place, bad things can happen. And all of this goes back to understanding that God is God and we are who we are. You have the creator creature distinction, and the best that we can do is to try to think God's thoughts after him and try to reason in a biblical fashion in the way that reason was intended to be used. So, I mean, just like with anything, you can abuse reason or you could use reason the way it was supposed to be used.
You know, that's very interesting. That's very interesting because I feel like that connects with some things that Brady, I want to say he addressed this maybe in chapter 12. I'm getting it's blurred between 12 and 13 right now. But so when we're talking about reason, right, I'm thinking about two different things. One, you have reason as in, that which is external to the individual. You know what I'm saying? Laws of logic, like reason as in, right ways of thinking, in such to where you align your ways of thinking to, that which is in accord with how reality actually is, the order of the world and all that kind of stuff. But then you have reasoning, I'll call it, which is like the internal rational processes that occur within one's mental states, right? And when it comes to that external that aspect of reason, like that's something that, it's almost kind of like it's almost kind of like the Force in Star Wars. You know what I mean? You can either use it for good or for bad. You know what I mean? It just exists outside the person. You can either be a Sith Lord with it, or you can be a Jedi. You know what I mean? It's something that's independent of us. You know what I mean? Reasoning seems to me is where it really intersects with what you're saying, is that our use of our rational faculties and, and how we use reason, you know what I mean? We can either do that well or not so well. I'm saying you can either do that magisterially, where again, you're sitting on top of, truth in a sense, as opposed to a ministerial position, you know what I'm saying, where it's not in competition with God, you know what I mean, in a sense, you know what I mean. But you can kind of make an idol of yourself almost by taking upon reason, using it wrongly in like a magisterial kind of a way. Now, I said that to say, in Let There Be Gaslight, he talks a great deal about logic, and he talks about how he kind of breaks down how even in the scripture there's room for believers or non-believers to use reason. And so he kind of creates a wedge where it's like he illustrates that somehow maybe he was in faith, but the Bible says you can also use reason. And then when I use reason, I walked away from the faith. It's kind of like he uses it that way. But in that middle step, right, it sounds to me like he took upon a magisterial role with respect to reason and reasoning, as opposed to using logic. He used the word logic, but reasoning in a ministerial role. So it's not enough to identify, yes, the scriptures implore us to use reason, but there are also some parameters that I think, or there's a proper function to reason. Maybe I'll put it that way. And that proper function is to guide us toward truth, God being the ultimate truth and so forth. Does that make sense? Or?
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said, to your point, you can hear it in the culture when you have people be on Sinetta channel talking about, I overstand, right? That's a dead giveaway. You standing over truth, right? Whereas I understand. I'm taking a posture of humility to truth, and I'm seeking to be guided by truth. And so, I mean, the improper use of reason can really make or break you. But once again, it all boils down. It's not just recognizing Jesus as Savior, but it's also recognizing the lordship of Jesus Christ. That really means something. Some people may have professed to be saved, but they never professed that Christ was Lord. He's even Lord of your intellectual life as well.
Oh, that's good, bro. That's real good. That's real good. Hey, before we move on, I just want to address this. And again, I don't have it up on the screen right so you can see it, but let me just, off of page 296, I want to address this little snippet here. He says, what this shows is that just like Romans 1, Bible believers are not opposed to the use of logic. Rather, they are opposed to logic that does not come to the conclusion they believe should naturally follow, right? So apparently Bible believers are opposed to logic that does not come to the conclusion that they believe should naturally follow. Again, I feel like what you have here, this is kind of just a misrepresentation of how things actually are. Now, maybe there are some believers like that, but again, as I showed in this passage, he's going back and forth and ultimately painting a broad brush, all believers. He says that Bible believers do X. I'm saying they do X. They believe that they get upset, if you will, if logic seems to be pointing away from what they believe should naturally follow. And obviously that's not true of all believers. I'm saying that clearly that's not true. If he didn't intend to label all believers in that way, then he should have been more clear in terms of how he wrote that passage. Maybe it was a subliminal diss, kind of like hip hop, Maybe it was one of subliminals. Maybe that's what he was doing. But if he didn't intend to do that, then he shouldn't have written it that way. You know what I mean?
A little bit gaslighting.
Yeah, some gaslight. You know what I mean? I feel gaslit. I'm feeling it now. I've been reading this Let There Be Gaslight. Now I'm feeling gaslit, But, the reality is, man, is that it's not about what we believe should naturally follow. The question is what naturally follows. You know what I'm saying? I believe that if you take the arguments for God's existence, for example, then the logic that naturally follows is that God exists. I'm saying, and we'll get into some of these arguments in specific here in a second. I also believe that with respect to arguments that go against the existence of God, I find them to be unwanting. I don't think that they logically add up. I don't think that they're sound arguments, meaning that either one of the premises are wrong, or ill-conceived, or the logic is invalid. I mean, it's the conclusion doesn't follow validly from the premises. That's what I think about arguments against theism. You know what I'm saying? It's not about what I believe should be the case. I'm saying that something is or is not logical, and that's what's at issue. It's not about preference or something like that. You know what I mean? So again, I think he's just kind of, broad brushing believers in a way that I think was kind of tacky, in my opinion. But
absolutely,
moving right along. Let's go ahead and get to the meat of it. So let me see. Did I put up here? All right, I'll come back to that slide in a second. So in this chapter, he's taking some jabs at some theistic arguments. I probably should say here that you and I, we communicated earlier today. There's just way too many mistakes being made in this one chapter to cover everything in one session. So this is just the beginning. I'm saying we're going to knock out at least two of the arguments here, and then we're going to circle back around on your channel, Urban Christian Institute, to finish out the rest of the chapter. So people will be on the lookout for that. But nevertheless, here's how he opens up, with the first argument out the gate that he's given some pushback on. He's going to list out he's going to put his pen to paper to give some pushback against some theistic arguments, and he starts with a cosmological one. He says the most cogent version of the cosmological argument for the existence of God goes, and then he makes a list of the premises. First of all, I just think it's interesting. I guess maybe it's just his opinion, but I'm not even sure if the Kalam is the most cogent. I mean, I guess some people that would kind of argue that. It's like somebody say contingency, or I don't know. Maybe it's most common or most popular. Maybe.
I think the contingency argument is pretty good, but
yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of hard. I don't know how he arrived at. It's kind of hard to say which one is the most cogent. But anyway, he says the most cogent version of the cosmological argument for the existence of God goes: premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, nothing. Oh, excuse me. Okay, well, yeah, he actually kind of rearranges it a bit.
Yeah, he kind of backloads he backloads premise 2 with the causal with what would be the causal analysis. So he's not.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay,
it would have been nice if he cited William Lane Craig or something.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. All right, so let me make sure I read it correctly, because then I'll show the way that I think most people will encounter it here in a second. Yep. He says, all right, so this version that he gives of the Kalam cosmological argument says premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, nothing can be the cause of itself. Premise 3, the universe began to exist. And in conclusion, the universe must have a cause that is A, not the universe, and B, uncaused. This uncaused cause, or first cause, we call God. Okay. So that's essentially, in essence, the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, granted, I mean, you can frame arguments in various different ways, and so I guess that's just kind of a version. But that's kind of a yeah. I don't think most people will encounter the Kalam that way. So I'm just going to kind of put it on the screen, and we'll maybe come back to it. But usually, what people will see is it just kind of looks more simplistic like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Typically it'll be worded close to this right here. But nevertheless, he says some he has some choice words for the Kalam, man. That I definitely want to get into. But before we get into that, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah. Back to his argument. Like here's the truth of the matter is nobody would use the Kalam cosmological argument to argue directly that God exists. No, what they would use the argument for is in a broader case for the existence of God to argue for the for the fact that the universe began to exist and that it has a cause.
Mm-hmm.
That's the conclusion of the argument. So Brady is kind of trying to stack the deck, because you'll hear people like Dillahunty say that, well, anybody can use this argument. A Muslim can use this argument, and it shouldn't be an argument for God if any other religion can use it. Well, no, we're putting together a cumulative case, or a case for the existence of God, demonstrating that the universe began to exist and that it needs a transcendent cause. That's what we're arguing for. And when we go into our causal analysis, that's where you understand what type of cause it has to be. Something that's not material, that's not within space, that's eternal. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines has to give rise to those very contingent things that we're talking about: space, time, matter,
and energy.
And energy.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. I mean, and I will say this: I think that I can't really get in Brady's mind, but maybe he's kind of blurring the lines between stage 1 and stage 2 of cosmological arguments. Like typically, they do come in 2 stages, where the first one, you're identifying some sort of fundamental, like first cause or fundamental element of the universe or something like that gave rise to it, or something along those lines. So that would be kind of represented by those 3 steps. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That would be like that first stage of a cosmological argument. And it's when you get to the second stage, like you said, of evaluating what kind of cause this must be, or what must this cause be like. That's when you begin to put some analysis together that points you in the direction of, hey, this isn't just some sort of force out here, but there's reason to think that we have a personal mind that's behind it all, right? But he doesn't even get into all that. You know what I'm saying? He just kind of takes a jab at a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and read it. I'm going to see where his criticisms lie. This is where I think it'll get a little fun here. So in terms of he says that there is a major, so after he lists out the premises, he says there is a major assumption in the premises of this argument, specifically that the universe began to exist. Let me read that again. He says there is a major assumption in the premises of this argument, specifically that the universe began to exist. He believes the statement that the universe began to exist to be a, quote, major assumption, right? And he believes that to be a point. Well, that's the point of contention that he takes. And then he begins to launch into the scientific, just, I guess, kind of leverage science against this notion that the universe began to exist. So do you want to talk about that first? I got some things to say about the philosophy of it, but do you want to get into some of the scientific points that he makes?
Yeah. Right now, number one, let me just go ahead and discuss this real quick. Whenever we're talking about explanations for causes, or explanations for some type of phenomenon that we're investigating, we need to be sure to make a distinction between a mechanistic explanation. Some people would call it a scientific explanation, but let's just use mechanistic, right? This would be explanation in terms of a mechanistic process or the use of natural laws and forces and things like that. And then there are explanations involving agency or personal explanation, right? And these would be explanations in terms of the intentional action of a person or agent. So when we're investigating whether or not the universe began, it's important to note that there are several lines of scientific evidence that point to the fact that the universe is not eternal. Okay, you have with the second law of thermodynamics. You also have the redshift detected by the Hubble telescope, but you also have the theory of general relativity. So let me just pull up a few things on my end. I'm not going to show them.
Oh yeah, do you think? Do you think?
And I kind of rushed the whole scientific explanation, but before I get to the scientific evidence and things like that, I just a few more words real quick.
Yeah,
I just want to say there's a contrast between these two types of explanations, scientific explanations or mechanistic explanations, where the effect is inferred from the causes and conditionings and the relevant laws that accompany it, right? And this is the type of paradigm that we see in physics, where we see various phenomena explained, which I already said. On the other hand, a personal explanation is one where the datum or the phenomenon are explained in terms of some rational agent's action, right? We see this in the study of history by understanding and explaining the historical actions or events in terms of some agent's reasons for taking that action in the context of the total circumstances. Good old Richard Swinburne notes that when we theists argue from a phenomenon such as the existence of the universe or a feature of the universe to the existence of God, we are arguing as has been seen, to a causal explanation of the phenomenon in terms of an intentional action. Let me keep it rolling.
Yeah, just to kind of give an example, a common one would be like right now, I'm looking at you through a MacBook computer, right? I could have, let's say that I was a computer, engineer or something like that, and I just have full knowledge of every piece, of I don't know, every microchip, every piece of the computer that I'm looking at right now, right? That I'm on as I'm doing this video. I can know everything about the computer, right? But that in of itself would not eliminate Steve Jobs as an explanation for how this computer came about. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because you have full knowledge of how something works doesn't eliminate what you describe as in terms of a personal explanation. I've heard what's his name, John Lennox give an example of I think he said like Aunt May or something like that, who's baking a cake, and he talks about how you could break down the chemical composition of the sugars and the dough and all these kind of things and know everything about the cake physically, but it still wouldn't tell you, ultimately like who made the cake and why. It's just a different type of explanation there. You know what I'm saying? Like why is there a cake? This is going to go beyond just some sort of physical explanation. The reason why there's a cake is because Aunt May made it for your birthday or something like that. There's a personal explanation with volition there, But yeah, go ahead.
All right. So what we see Brady doing is to really it's really I'm gonna throw what I can at the wall and see what else sticks, because what we're about to see is several different approaches to cosmology. And so what he says, there is a major assumption in the premises of the argument, specifically that the universe began to exist. What we currently understand about our reality is that the universe began to expand at a certain point, and from a certain point, and from a certain point. This expansion is commonly referred to as the Big Bang. Before all that, all matter and radiation that is now in the earth, in your body, in the stars, and in the entire universe seems to have existed as energy condensed into an infinitely dense region called a singularity. Theoretical physicist Sean Carroll has cautioned that the singularity before the Big Bang is not the beginning of our universe, it's the end of our understanding. What Carroll means by this is that Einstein's theory of general relativity, the mathematical equation used to extrapolate backwards to that point, breaks down and cannot give us accurate information beyond the singularity. So in order to speak confidently about anything before that point, something more accurate than Einstein equation is needed. Let me see here, because Brady did something, right? So I looked at the quote by Sean Carroll, and it was a YouTube video, and I traced it back to the YouTube video. I also was able to get the transcript of the YouTube video, and Sean Carroll didn't say that the singularity or the Big Bang is not the beginning. I want to put what Sean Carroll said into context. And there's a pretty good debate that everybody might want to check out between Sean Carroll and Dr. William Lane Craig. It was a good debate. And then I think on Capturing Christianity, I offer a little commentary and a review of that debate.
Yeah, it was good.
Maybe one day me and you can review it, Adam. That'd be pretty fun.
Oh, yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, that'd be real cool. You know what's up.
This is what Sean Carroll said. He states, what we are really doing is using a theory to draw a conclusion to which we have no right to believe what that theory is telling us. That theory, of course, is classical general relativity, Einstein's theory of space, time, and gravity. If you extrapolate in classical general relativity back to the Big Bang and keep going backwards, you hit a singularity, a moment when the curvature of space-time the space-time expansion rate and energy density are infinitely big. So in classical general relativity, you would say that that is a boundary to space-time, that is a point past which you can no longer go. However, you absolutely have no reason to think that classical general relativity is an appropriate and correct description of what is happening near the Big Bang. And here's what he said versus what Brady quote. We should not think of the Big Bang as the beginning of the universe. We should think of it as the end of our understanding of what is happening. This sounds a little bit like a dodge of the implications of the singularity and the Big Bang, and a pushing of, it's really a pushing of the science of the gaps. I want you to remember what I just said about the personal explanations versus the scientific explanations. Here's the thing. If with the Big Bang, the laws of nature, the laws of science come into being, you know, gravity, time, space, energy, what is science but the studying of reality, right? Based on these descriptions of reality that we call laws. But if you don't have any descriptions of reality or laws to begin with, and all that those things come into being at a certain point, a mechanistic explanation is not going to cut it. And I do think that you're warranted and justified in looking for a different type of explanation. But I want to just point out that even if we go through what everybody understood the singularity, the implications of Einstein's theory of general relativity to be, they understood what it means. Even Einstein tried to fudge his numbers.
Right.
But go ahead, Adam.
No, I think that's important. I mean, we want to get a right context for what's being said. You know, that there's only but so far back that we can go with respect to the universe's beginnings. You know, after a while, like things get a little blurry. We can't go past it. But that's not to say, you know, that something can't be said about the universe coming into being, and and there being a point to that. We could also talk about, and by point I mean like a point, established point in time. Like we could talk about the Bohr-Guthrie-Lincoln theorem. You know what I'm saying, in terms of how they've done equations to see, like, well, if you look at how the universe is expanding and you just kind of rewind the tape back and go far enough back, then you get to a point where time and the expansion of the universe can't go any further back. I mean, it's just it's as far as you can go. You know, so you don't have like a eternal universe. I'm saying, like, there's, given the expansion of it, we know that there was a beginning somewhere. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I think that, to me, again, this is where there's one of these missteps, you know what I'm saying, with respect to Brady's analysis, because like you said, if we just want to talk about the science of it, just off that alone, and we do have certain arguments that we can appeal to, that would suggest that there's a beginning. So it's not just, some sort of an assumption, like as he framed it, like you mentioned, the red shift, if you will. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that suggests, and I'll put some links to this, because we can't defend every single thing we say here, but I'll put some links so people can dig further. But red shift seems to suggest that there was a beginning. When we think about there being energy, usable energy in the universe as it is now, given the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, if the universe had been around forever, then we should already, be in a state where there's no usable energy in the universe. But clearly that's not the case, and so we've got reason to think that the universe hasn't been around forever. It'd be like if I left my car on, running or something like that, and you came back and the car was still running, and after I told you to go get my keys or something like that, you would know the car hadn't been running but for so long, because if it had run but for so long, it would have ran out of gas. You know what I mean? So likewise with the universe, given that it hasn't run out of gas, we've got scientific reasons, and given the presence of usable energy in the universe, to say it hasn't been running forever. And so just things like that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Brady tries to put forth a position that scientists don't understand this singularity to be the beginning. Now, Sean Curl would try to say, no, we should think of it as the first moment in time. We'll get into with traversing actual infinite in a minute. But I mean, what did the scientists understand the singularity to be? I mean, these are some of the older guys. I'll get to a few contemporary voices. Arthur Eddington had this to say. He said, I have no axe to grind in this discussion, but the notion of a beginning is repugnant to me. I simply do not believe that the present order of things started off with a bang. The expanding universe is preposterous, incredible. It leaves me cold. Walter Nest also noted to deny the infinite duration of would be to betray the foundations of science. Alan Sandage of Carnegie Observatories comments, it's such a strange conclusion. It really cannot be true. And Einstein himself, whose general relativity paved the way for the development of the Big Bang, said the idea of an expanding universe irritates me, and to admit such a possibility seems senseless.
See, they don't seem too happy about that expansion, bro. They don't seem to.
No,
because again, that goes back to what I was saying. As expansion, if you reverse that, talk about Bohr-Guthrie-Lincoln, then that expansion is looking like, there's a starting point here somewhere. But yeah, go ahead.
But check this out. So I'm not going to get to it yet, and we might not have time. But Brady points to the model of Penrose, and I get the exact name for Penrose model.
The oscillating model.
It's similar to the oscillating model. It has a fancy name, a conformal cyclic cosmological model.
Oh, okay, got you. Go for it.
But Hawkins and Penrose did some work to actually confirm the singularity, the Big Bang, if you will. But look what Hawkins had to say in reflecting on the standard or hot Big Bang model. Hawkins says it would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us. He also, this is Hawkins, right? This is he also says, so long as the universe had a beginning that was a singularity, one could suppose that it was created by an outside agency. But if the universe is really self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would be neither created nor destroyed. It would simply be. What place then for a creator? I point this out. I point this quote out by Hawkins specifically to illustrate that scientists know what having the singularity means and have tried to postulate other speculative models that lack the empirical support that the Big Bang model enjoys. And basically, every time they try to disprove the Big Bang, they wind up giving it more evidence for its likelihood. They wind up confirming it more and more. What do we look for in scientific models? Testable, repeatable, all that good stuff, right?
That's right.
So we don't have to play dumb about what the singularity means.
Well, yeah, and I think that we also want to, again, we're looking at a theory. You want a theory that explains as much as you can possibly get out. You want to get a lot of mileage out of it. You know, if you got a theory that only explains one thing versus the one that explains 50, then the one that explains 50, all things being equal, is going to be preferable. And to your point, you know, the Big Bang theory, which is commonly referred to as the standard cosmological model, is the gift that keeps on giving. It's the standard cosmological model for a reason. You know what I'm saying? It's that way for a reason. But, you know, going back to your previous point, you can't run to this whole singularity biz in order to escape, you know, the second premise, you know, of the Kalam is generally stated that the universe had a beginning, because as you pointed out, with these various different scientists and physicists and so on, they know what the implications of a singularity is. You know what I'm saying, and clearly to them it implies some I would just say theism or some sort of ism, you know, that fit well with the atheist or naturalistic outlook of the world. You know what I mean? So with that being said, you also pointed out, I was going to read this here because I feel like it gets a little worse. After he deals with Sean Carroll and the singularity, he brings up this issue of your boy, Lawrence Krauss, your boy Larry, you know what I mean? So let me just read this right quick. It's on page 297. Brady says, an infinitely dense region seems like another way of saying not enough space for space. So he goes from the singularity, now he's transitioning into talking about this whole not enough space for space thing, right? Or in other words, nothing. Read that again. An infinitely dense region seems like another way of saying not enough space for space, or in other words, quote, nothing. He puts some kind of scare quotes there. But theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss explains that after the Higgs boson particle was discovered in 2012, it became clear that nothing in this sense refers to empty space that is not quite empty. Rather, fluctuations of dark energy at the quantum level appear seemingly out of nowhere and nothing, and then very quickly disappear. Then, during a period of inflation such as the Big Bang, these fluctuations become frozen and eventually responsible for determining the character of protons and electrons, and eventually all matter. Now, if I really wanted to be petty, then I would mention the fact that he spells Lawrence Krauss Krouse, but it's actually correctly spelled Krauss. But anyway, I'm not going to be petty. He also, when I said protons and electrons, I had to catch myself because the actual print, it says elections instead of electrons. But I'm not going to be petty. I'm just going to leave that where it is. So he's talking about this notion of nothing, right? And this idea of things coming from nothing. But as he said, you know, these are rather fluctuations of, quote, dark energy at the quantum level, right? So here's his claim, man. Can we get something out of nothing? You know, he asked that question earlier, you know, and now he seems to be flirting with this idea from Krauss that maybe we can. You know what I mean? I got something to say about that. Matter of fact, let me just throw this out here. I'm going to get mine out the way real quick. You know, first of all, Lawrence Krauss, man, he was taking a task about this whole thing about things coming from nothing, bro. Like,
are you about to read David Albert or no?
Oh, I'm gonna hit him up with. Well, you can hit him with yours. I'm gonna bring up my guy.
Go ahead,
George
bro.
Ellis too. You know what I mean? We
go
gonna
ahead.
layer it on. You know what I mean?
They told him a new one. Go ahead.
Well, I tell you, well, let's start with the science first, and then we'll get into this whole biz about nothing. Let me start with that. All right. So you got my guy George Ellis, the big homie. I'm saying well-known, well-revered physicist George Ellis. He was asked about Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, in an interview. And the question that said, watch, I'll just read what he was asked, and then I'll give his response. He was asked, Lawrence Krauss in A Universe from Nothing. That's the book that Krauss, where he wrote about this notion that Brady's talking about. Lawrence Krauss in A Universe from Nothing claims that physics has basically solved the mystery of why there is something rather than nothing. Do you agree? And then Krauss says, certainly not. He is presenting untested, speculative theories of how things came into existence out of a pre-existing complex of entities, including variational principles, quantum field theory, specific symmetry groups, a bubbling vacuum, all the components of a standard model of particle physics, and so on. He does not explain in what way these entities could have pre-existed the coming into being of the universe, why they should have existed at all, or why they should have had the form that they did. And he gives no experimental or observational process whereby we could test these vivid speculations of the supposed universe generation mechanism. How indeed can you test what has existed? How indeed can you test what existed before the universe existed? You can't. That's the homie George Ellis right there. Again, prominent physicist. But I know you said you got some more, man. You got some more bars there, huh? Oh, you muted again.
When you want to go in on somebody so bad,
you just hype. You just ready in there.
But once again, and if you have more to add, you can. All of this, like I said, we deal with what Sean Curl said, and what Sean Curl said is we shouldn't think, we shouldn't feel, right? Basically what he's telling me, we shouldn't feel that this was the beginning, this singularity was the beginning. We have to change the way that we think about it. So Sean Curl is talking about how you think. This dude right here is trying to redefine what nothing is.
Right.
But and I'm reading from the Blackwell Companion in Natural Theology, where Craig and Sinclair said popularizers touting such theory as getting something from nothing apparently do not understand that the vacuum, the quantum vacuum, is not nothing but a sea of fluctuating energy endowed with a rich structure and subject to physical laws. Such models do not therefore involve a true origination ex nihilo. But David Albert, right? It gets worse. David Albert wrote this in, I believe, the New York. Let me just make sure I got it right.
And I'll put the reference on the screen, like when we finish this video.
Make sure. New York Times.
Okay.
Right? And David Albert is a philosophy of quantum mechanics at Columbia, Ivy League school, right? David Albert says this: vacuum states, no less than giraffes or refrigerators or solar systems, are particular arrangements of elementary physical stuff. The true relativistic quantum field theoretical equivalent to there not being any physical stuff at all isn't this or that particular arrangements of fields. What is obviously, and ineluctably, and on the contrary, is this simple absence of the fields. The fact that some arrangements of the fields happen to correspond to the existence of particles and some don't is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that some possible arrangements of my fingers some possible arrangements of my fingers happen to correspond to the existence of a fist, and some don't. A fist and some don't. And the fact that particles pop in and out of existence over time as those fields rearrange themselves is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that fists can pop in and out of existence over time as my fingers rearrange themselves. And none of these poppings, if you look at them, all right, amount to anything even remotely in the neighborhood of a creation from nothing. He says a century ago, it seems to him, nobody would have made such a peep about referring to a stretch of space without any material particles in it as nothing. And now that he and his colleagues think they have a way of showing how everything there could imaginably have emerged from a stretch of space like that, the nutcases are moving the goalposts. Let me say it again. The nutcases are moving the goalposts. He complains that some philosophers and many theologians define and redefine nothing as not being any of the versions of nothing that science is currently described. And now I am told by religious critics that I cannot refer to empty space as nothing, but rather as a quantum vacuum to distinguish it from the philosophers or theologians idealize nothing. And he does a good deal of railing about the intellectual bankruptcy of much theology in some of modern philosophy. But all there is to say about this, as far as I can see, is that Krauss is dead wrong, and his religious and philosophical critics are absolutely right. Who cares about what would or would not have made a peep about 100 years ago? We were wrong 100 years ago. We know more now. And if what we formerly took for nothing turns out on closer examination to have the markings of protons and neutrons and tables and chairs and planets and solar systems and galaxies and universe in it, then it wasn't nothing and couldn't have been nothing in the first place. And the history of science, if we understand it correctly, gives us no hint of how it might be possible to imagine otherwise.
So that's where the battle rap horn got to come in. Don DeMarco. Like for people who are not familiar with scientific writings, like that would be the equivalent of somebody just hitting another battle rapper with a crazy punchline, and the room just kind of shake the room with it. That's what that was right there. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's funny. I was thinking about when we were doing this here with the example. This looks like waving goodbye to Lawrence Krauss. His theory of nothing and Brady's use of Lawrence Krauss's work. Like, he just doesn't stand up. You know what I mean? It doesn't stand up to scrutiny, man.
I mean, this is popular level stuff, like we just said. This stuff is getting shredded by real academics.
Right.
It's getting shredded. So,
and it's not just Christians complaining about it. Like, that's not what this is. These are people that are in his field on grounds of what the evidence states, I'm saying, that are refuting this notion of nothingness and this ability to produce something, right?
Yeah, lighting him up. And so what's the next move for Brady, right? The next move is, once again, we throwing everything at the wall and seeing if it sticks. The next move, he says, the prominent cosmologist Sir Roger Penrose has theorized that the singularity that preceded the inflation which led to our universe was actually the end of a preceding and dying universe. And that our universe will in turn one day die, leaving a similar singularity which might spawn another. Okay. Got a lot of respect for Sir Roger Penrose. The gentleman is older. Matter of fact, he and I think it was Stephen Hawking's formulated the Hawkins-Penrose model dealing with the singularity. And so, obviously, once again, a lot of people didn't like the fact that the Big Bang keeps getting confirmed.
Keep sneaking in there some kind of way, yeah.
It keeps sneaking in there some type of way. So Penrose, Hawkins is dead. Penrose has decided to do a little something different with this model that he's pushing. But I got a few things to say about his model, right?
Yeah, go for it.
The issue with Penrose model is it suffers from many deficiencies. Penrose view involves declaring that the final state of a universe in expansion to infinity is the same state as the beginning of a new Big Bang event. This is mind-blowing based on the fact that one is infinitely large and the other one is infinitely small. And to try to make them identical requires mathematical gymnastics as well as revising physics. This would require that all entropy generated by black holes go away. And it also requires electrons to lose their mass, even though, according to physics, the mass of an electron is a conserved quantity that cannot be lost. And for more discussion on the conformal cyclic cosmological model of Penrose, we're going to post a link to Luke Barnes, who's also a scientist, where he goes into
Luke Barnes, that dude,
a little bit more depth. But the fact of the matter is, what is it? 3 strikes and you out. So we we had Sean Curl, which was a YouTube video that he's citing. We had the nutcase Lawrence Krauss, and this is this is nutty, redefining what nothing is. That's very nutty, and he's been called out on it by other scientists and philosophers of quantum physics and quantum mechanics. And then you have Sir Roger Penrose, and his model just does not conform to reality, right? Electrons don't do what he would have and require electrons to do. So there's just no empirical evidence for what he's pushing. And so what Brady has in this book might be something for and I'm not talking down on nobody, but it might shake somebody who's not secure in their allegiance to Christ the King. But I mean, if you just ask a little bit more questions, if you look at this in the comfort of your community and really work through these issues, I mean, the truth is out there. The truth is out there, and I don't think anybody should be shook from any of this. I do think that on the scientific evidence, that we have good reasons to believe that the universe did have a cause for its existence that was transcendent of the universe itself. I do believe that sticks. And that's just the scientific evidence.
Well, yeah, and that's a good segue for me, man, because so here for me was the major sticking point. Like you said, just again, kind of recapping, if you look at him, bringing up Lawrence Krauss, I mean, that doesn't do you any good, only because for the simple fact that, when it comes to singularity, as you quoted, you have scientists who believe that the implication there is that there might be very well a, God-sized foot in the door of creation that they want to avoid. So, just that in and of itself, the singularity doesn't really, I think really help, Brady's case very much. When it comes to the second piece, with this notion of nothing, Lawrence Krauss, I mean, he's being taken to task by people in his own field and just read the Riot Act, for essentially making something out of nothing, even in regard to his own findings, just trying to redefine the term nothing, which, by the way, before I forget, just as another point, when Lawrence Krauss is kind of hijacking this word nothing, he's and leveraging it against the philosophical question of why there's something rather than nothing. Essentially what you have there is an equivocation, okay? An equivocation fallacy going on, where you're using a word that can, I just put it, you're using a word in 2 different ways in order to leverage, for your argument. That's essentially what he's doing there. He's really typically what you see there with equivocation is that there's a word that can have 2 meanings, 2 or more meanings, and you're using it different ways within your argument. In this case, Lawrence Krauss is creating a meaning for nothing, and then trying to use it in a different way than the philosophers use it in order to cut against what philosophers are saying. So that's like he's creating his own definition and then engaging in equivocation. But when philosophers talk about, or ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Or they talk about how you can't get something out of nothing, things along those lines. They're referring to nothing in the sense that it's, classically defined. They're referring to something that's a state of just universal negation, absolute negation, a state in which there is no thing. I'm saying it's just like saying if somebody says there's nobody at the party, right? Then you're saying that there's nobody. It wouldn't make any sense to say, well, who was there? Well, there's nobody. There's nobody. Nobody's there, right? So when we talk about no thing, again, it's a state of like absolute, negation. Where you're saying that there's a state of affairs in which there is no thing. There's no capacities, no substances, nothing, right? And so in that sense, if you have a state of affairs where there is no thing, then there's nothing that can have the properties or capacities to cause anything, right? That's what philosophers are talking about. Krauss is trying to flip the script and equivocate and saying, well, he's going to use the word nothing to describe this sea of quantum physics fluctuations on the quantum level. You know what I mean? Well, that's just not the nothing that philosophers are talking about. So you can't, you can't equivocate and then pat yourself on the back, you know what I mean, for proving something, you know what I mean? But anyway, so that whole thing with Krauss just goes out the window, scientific grounds, and then also, by virtue of him equivocating to address a philosophical question about nothingness. And then, we come to Penrose, there's lots of models out there. There's lots of different models. But as you mentioned, with the standard cosmological model, aka the Big Bang, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And ultimately, we've got cause to think that Penrose's model just isn't up to snuff. You know what I mean? And so he hasn't given us anything on a scientific level. As he cites Carroll, Krauss, Penrose, he hasn't given us anything. And there's this other glaring problem. Now, when you talk about the Kalam cosmological argument, again, I'm just going to put it on the screen. Matter of fact, put it on the screen. When you talk about the Kalam cosmological argument, typically you're going to see it framed this way, right? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, right? Now, anybody knows, particularly now, again, we're talking about somebody who says that he was into apologetics and apparently taught apologetics. He taught apologetics at the university level, okay? So this is a guy who's not a novice, right? Here's the issue. As he's taking a jab at the second premise, anybody who defends his argument will tell you that the second premise, that the fact that the universe began to exist, has two different forms of defenses, broadly speaking. There's two categories of defenses for that second premise. One category would be to appeal to scientific evidence. We talked about that a little bit earlier, like, the second law of thermodynamics, red shift, Borg-Lincoln theorem. Like, they're going to take something from science and say, hey, these scientific realities suggest that the universe had the beginning. That's one branch of argumentation that you're going to provide for that second premise that the universe had began to exist. The other branch of argumentation are philosophical arguments that, if they hold, suggest that the universe had began to exist. Okay, so you have the scientific evidence for premise number two, but then you also have the philosophical evidences that suggest that the universe began to exist. Now, these philosophical supports for premise two stand independent of the scientific evidence. They're their own separate class of arguments, right? Nevertheless, when it comes to Brady's book, he only deals with the scientific side. You know what I'm saying? He only deals with the scientific aspect of premise two, which is extremely strange, because if he's done apologetics for any length of time, particularly dealing with his cosmological argument, or dare I say, if he had done his homework, then he should know that even if you just take the scientific evidence off the table, you could run the Kalam cosmological argument on the basis of just the philosophical arguments alone. You say, I cannot appeal. I don't have to appeal to the scientific evidences to support premise two. I can simply just go on the philosophical arguments by themselves that support premise two, and then the argument still flows. You can still move forward with the Kalam cosmological argument as a whole. And so this is a major oversight. I guess maybe only like nerdy apologists will understand like how big of a deal this is. The fact that this dude is pushing back against the Kalam cosmological argument and misses a whole branch of argumentation for the second premise, while he claims it to be an assumption, right? He claims the premise about the universe beginning to exist. He claims that's an assumption, But there is a list of arguments that we can give on by virtue of the fact that we can affirm premise 2, and we're not assuming anything. We can give philosophical arguments to do so. And the fact that he missed out on that whole class of arguments and think that he's done something, to undermine the Kalam is really strange to me. You know what I'm saying? And dare I say, I think that it's either, I'm just going to say it, I think the brother don't know what he's talking about. I'm gonna just be straight up with you. And I know that's harsh, but at least on this argument, I can confidently say the brother doesn't know what he's talking about. Because if he did, there's no way that he would take a jab at the Kalam cosmological argument and not deal with one single philosophical support for its premises and think that you've done something, by attacking the scientific side. I'm gonna go further on that, but I know I said a lot just now. You want to chime in on that right quick?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would try to bypass the philosophical arguments because they have a very narrow understanding of what evidence is. So you can have scientific evidence. You can also have philosophical evidence. I would also say that theology and philosophy provides the framework for which science can even get off the ground. The notion that other minds exist, that is a metaphysical fact. That's not a scientific fact. The laws of logic are not scientific facts or anything like that. Science has to adhere to them to even operate. And so, number one, when you hold to a philosophy known as scientism, you think that science can prove everything, or science that can prove science, and it can. And so, why would he even why would he even think that this would be an issue if he's that narrow-minded? And as you said, this argument can be ran, like you said, just on the philosophical evidence alone. I think Dr. Braxton Hunter, in his debate with Matt Dillahunty, ran this argument on just the philosophical arguments alone. And the only thing that Dillahunty could do was simply say, well, it's not an argument for the God of Christianity.
Right. Well, I mean, but see, that's the funny thing about it. Like, honestly, I guess in my experience, I don't know of any apologists who would run this argument on the basis of the scientific evidence, at least in terms of the second premise. Now, obviously, they're going to cite the scientific evidence that supports it, but I don't know of anybody who would teach this argument or work their way through it without leaning heavily upon the philosophical supports for premise 2. And so the fact that he overlooks that and just oversteps it, I think, is a huge gaping hole in his critique of the Kalam argument. And I think it displays a lack of knowledge on his part. I think he really don't know what he's talking about with respect to the Kalam. Now, that then for me calls into question, and I'm just being real, that calls into question how much. I mean, I know you said that, I mean, I know he said he taught apologetics, you know what I mean? I know that he said he's been in the game for a long time, but now I have to then, like, to me, there's a red flag. I have to then be suspicious that he isn't as well versed in these topics as he has led on. You know what I'm saying, I'm not calling the man a liar. That's not my intent. I'm not saying he's lying per se, but I just think that he may not be as well versed in these things as he thinks he is. Maybe I'll just put it that way. So, for example, again, he says that there's this huge assumption. There's a major assumption that the universe began to exist. But again, on the philosophical evidence alone, all right. Here's a list of different arguments that people give, both philosophical and scientific, for the existence, for the universe having a beginning, right? You can appeal to any of these, right? And he doesn't address not one of them. He says it's a major assumption that the universe had a beginning. I'm showing you a list of arguments, and I could give more, you know what I'm saying, that philosophers or apologists will provide to suggest that there was a beginning, right? So it's not an assumption. We're arguing for it. You know what I'm saying? You can't say that it's a major assumption when we got arguments upon arguments in print to demonstrate that the universe had a beginning, both scientific and philosophical, right? So just to give a perfect example, we don't have to go through all of these, but just to kind of give a sampling, let's talk about this notion of time, right? If the universe did not have a beginning, then that would suggest that time was infinite in the past, but easy to understand argument I think that somebody would give that kind of debunks that, if you will, or pushes against that, is the fact that if time were eternal in the past, then there's no way that we could have arrive at the present. You know what I'm saying? If time is eternal in the past, then there's no way that time could have arrived here to the present where we sit today. It would be like jumping out of a bottomless pit. You know what I'm saying? Um, I kind of use an analogy. I'll just make this quick. And actually, I think I use this. I don't know if I put this in the book or not, but when it comes to like just as a thought experiment, let's say that you're on a football field. You're at the 50-yard line. And I say to you, hey, you can get $1 million. I'm saying if you walk in a straight line, step by step, to the end zone. The only catch is before you take each step, you must first take, for every step forward, you must first take an equally sized step backwards before you can take a step forward. You can't make any turns. You can't back into the end zone some kind of way. It's got to be a basic straight line. Now, if that's the scenario, and you have to take at least an equally sized step backwards before you can take a step forward, then obviously you're going to start moonwalking away from that $1 million. I'm saying, because you'll never have a fixed starting point from which to move forward. You'll always be taking a step back. That's what it's like for time. If time is infinite in the past, there's no starting point by which time can move forward, and then we would arrive at the present. You know what I'm saying? So if that's the case, it just basically shows the absurdity, of there being such a state of affairs, given the fact that we are here in the present. Now the implications of that is, in order for us to arrive at the present, then time must have had a beginning. Just kind of bring it back as the standard cosmological Big Bang model suggests, right? Time had to have a beginning. I'm saying, the universe is not, and if time had a beginning, then that means the universe, saying, being temporal as it is not eternal in the past. That's one example. You could also talk about how you can't reach infinity by succession. You can't count your way up to infinity. You can count from now until whenever, and you will never have reached a set where you've counted an infinite number of instances. But the thing is, if you can't count to infinity, that means that you can't count down from infinity. I'm saying it's by the same concept. If you can't count down from infinity, that suggests that there must not be an infinite number of events in the past, successive events in the past, right? And so there again, there's the implication of that would be that the universe can't then be past eternal, because you can't have an infinite number of successive events, coming up to the present. There has to be a starting point, right? We could talk about it even further. I'm not going to get into it because it would take us probably a whole video. But even recent scholarship, I'm thinking about guys like Alexander Proust, for example, or we could talk about my guy Robert Koons. You know what I'm saying? Having worked on this notion of there being a Grim Reaper paradox, right? Where they use what's called the Grim Reaper paradox. I'll put a link to it in the chat so people can, or in the description, so people can read it on their own. But basically, they demonstrate that some sort of infinite regress of successive causes, or in a causal chain, if you will, is as nonsensical as a squared circle, as a circle, with 4 sides, or a triangle with 15 sides. It's metaphysically, it's impossible. Right? They kind of demonstrate that with this paradox. I said all that to say, again, in addition to the scientific evidences, there are arguments that philosophers and apologists will leverage in support of premise 2, that the universe began to exist. Right? It's not an assumption. Okay, it's not a major assumption. There's reasons why people believe it, and as such, to me, it does a disservice to those who are proponents of these arguments. Maybe he doesn't care about doing a disservice or not, but it's. I don't know if the word is condescending or what the right word would be, but it's like this kind of a disrespectful straw man. I'll just kind of put it that way, to say that it's a major assumption. The fact of the matter is, it's not an assumption. There are arguments for the beginning of the universe, both philosophical and scientific. And the fact that he didn't address not single one of them demonstrates to me that either he doesn't know what he's talking about with respect to the Kalam cosmological argument, either maybe he was perhaps lazy in addressing the argument in a way that's I'll just put intellectually honest, or I would say maybe he's dishonest. I don't want to put the dishonesty on the table. I'll leave that aside, because I'd rather not go there. And so that just leaves me with this notion that I think he just isn't as well versed in these things as he believes himself to be. And I think that it shows up in having these glaring holes in his work, particularly in regard to the Kalam. Said a lot there. I had to get that off my chest.
Oh man, you handled that masterfully. I've heard of the Grim Reaper paradoxes, but I'm gonna have to go familiarize myself with them.
Well, yeah.
But
So
yeah,
there's different types of. Well, let me put it this way. Like one of the more common defenses for um, the second premise of the Kalam is Hilbert's Hotel. Or things like that, where you show that if you start taking infinity, the concept of infinity, and treating it as if it can be an actuality in the real world, then you end up with all these weird absurdities that, given the fact that they're so absurd, is illustrative of the fact that infinities can't be instantiated in the actual world, right? So Hilbert's Hotel is like that. There's another one that I think that I feel like it might go back to Al-Ghazali, where he talks about if you have, well, I could be wrong about that, but there's this other one where it's like if you have Saturn and Jupiter, and for every, say, 24 hours, Saturn goes around a moon, twice, and then Jupiter once, but if they go on forever, then eventually you would say that they would, go on for infinity. There would be like an infinite number of revolutions, and thus they would have the same number. But that can't be the case because Saturn's going around twice versus Jupiter going around once. It's just another absurdity. That's obviously not the case, and so that suggests there's no infinity. In the actual world. But so you have the kinds of arguments that will show some sort of absurdity, but then the Grim Reaper paradox takes it a step further. They're saying it's not only absurd that an infinite regress in a causal chain, it's not just absurd, but it's logically impossible. It's metaphysically impossible. It just can't be the case, So absurdity would be like, yeah, that'd be super weird to the point where we shouldn't think that's the case. The Grim Reaper paradox is like, nah, it's not just weird, it's impossible. There's a good reason for us. It's like a square circle. And so in either case, again, Brady doesn't even sniff at any of those arguments, and he doesn't even, he just deals with the scientific part and doesn't even think about it.
He don't even sniff at them.
He's not even sniffing at the philosophical side. And so here's the thing. I could give those arguments that I just listed out. I could go from premise one. Let me just show, this is the last thing I'm gonna say. I could, if I'm giving this argument, I can start at premise one, whatever begins to exist as a cause, and give, reasons why that would be the case. Out of nothing comes, experience, what have you. And then I could go on to premise two and just give these arguments here. And let's just leave off the science part. I could just give these 5 arguments. And in doing so, there would be sufficient reason for me to affirm premise 2, that the universe began to exist, given the fact that infinity is not possible in the actual world. Therefore, the universe can't be infinite or eternal in the past. And then just on that alone, I've now justified affirming that both premise 1 and premise 2 are more plausible than their negations. I could do that without touching the scientific stuff, which would then bring me to the conclusion that the universe had a cause. So like the Kalam cosmological argument is not weakened in any way by removing the scientific evidence. It was defended like way before modern cosmology. This is an argument that goes back to like the Middle Ages. So Cass was defending it on philosophical grounds for centuries before science really came into play. You know what I mean? And so I just think it's a very strange oversight on this part. But yeah, man, we were supposed to be getting through chapter 13. I think we got to wrap it up here.
We might have to do
one,
we might have to do a 3-part.
You know what? You might be right, bro. You might be right. Because this is just this has been a really poor treatment of the cosmological argument. I'm
sorry.
Nah, go ahead.
I'm just saying, when it's that bad, sometimes the cleanup crew got to come out and put in a little extra work.
Right.
When it's that bad.
Right. Yeah, I used to work at a theme park when I was in high school, but at Kings Dominion out here in Virginia. And one of the things that you would hate to do is be getting off of work and say like 20 or 30 minutes, and they call you over to the funnel cake stand or the Mexican restaurant because it's gonna be that. It's gonna be a ridiculous cleanup. You know what I mean? That's where I find myself right now. Like when it comes to Brady's treatment of the Kalam and the other arguments that we'll get to, it's like working at that funnel cake stand. It's bad out here, man. It's hard work. It's hard work, But nevertheless, this is what we do, man. This is what we do. So yeah, we might end up being, maybe we'll do 3 parts. We still got to deal with his treatment of the sensus divinitatis and some of the teleological and transcendental arguments. We got a ways to go on chapter 13, but just to sum it up, again, it's starting off real bad for your boy, man. He's demonstrating fundamental misunderstandings of these arguments, already, and I think we will see that as we move forward to describe the other ones, But yeah, man, you want to what you want to do, man? You want to say some last words and then we'll be out?
Yeah, it doesn't get any better. And
Right.
I'm pretty sure if Brady sees this, he's gonna complain. But I mean, it is what it is. You should have did your homework, Doc.
I mean, it is what it is,
It is what it is. You presented a book as painting Christians as if they don't have any responses to what philosophers will call defeaters, and we have presented defeaters for your defeaters to show, at least up till now. I mean, even starting back in the first chapter where Alfredo and crew went to work demonstrating that you have not dealt with the best that Christianity has to offer in terms of arguments and explanations, and to think that you have, I'm sorry, so hopefully you do see this. Try to be charitable, but when you have 30 years of training and expertise and experience, you get what's warranted and what's measured out to that level of credibility. So it is what it is. But I enjoyed this. I live for it.
You already know, man. You already know. So I mean, this is what we do. And I ain't gonna hold you, right? I got one more bar, man. I gotta do it. I gotta
go ahead, my brother. Go ahead.
So I'm sitting here thinking I can't let this slide. So we'll just call this extra chump change. You know what I mean? So when it comes to the Sir Roger Penrose, I'm looking at it right now, page 298. 297. I'm just gonna read it. He says the prominent cosmologist Sir Roger Penrose has theorized that the singularity that preceded the inflation, which led to our universe, was actually the end of a preceding dying universe, and that our universe will in turn one day die, leaving a similar singularity which might spawn another. You already addressed that piece. So he says that, and then he says this offends the sensibilities of believers who can only place God in the category of needing no cause and having life within himself. Man, I can. All right. Well, so he says, all right, this offends the sensibility of believers. I'm gonna rock it out. I'm sorry. Let me just go ahead and do it. This offends the sensibilities of believers who can only place God in the category of needing no cause and having life within himself, and they are unwilling to grant the same quality to virtual particles or dark energy from which the universe might have sprung. One benefit of placing God at the beginning is that a personal deity would have the will to intentionally cause reality to shift from a state of non-being into being, or from simplicity to complexity, whereas the quantum fluctuations could be random. And in that case, how could we trust any form of logic or ethics that derive from a random process? But even if we grant that the cause must be a personal God or something like it, we would still be left with the task of determining which God. I'm just going to end up there. But first of all, which is with that last part, as far as determining which God, it's not the goal of the Kalam cosmological argument to land specifically on demonstrating that the God of Christianity is indeed that cause. So the comment he makes about still having to figure out which God it is, that would be like you showing up to McDonald's and critiquing and be like, yeah, y'all burger is good, but y'all don't have a solid pizza that I could order off the menu. You know what I'm saying? Like McDonald's doesn't sell pizza. And when they did try to make pizza, it didn't work out too well. A lot of indigestion. But the bottom line is you don't go to Little Caesars and complain that they don't have hamburgers. You know what I'm saying? Because that's not what Little Caesars does. Likewise, it doesn't make sense, for him to be, oh, well, even if we have this cause, of the universe, well, we haven't gotten to identifying what that cause is. Right. Because that's not the point of the Kalam. So that's number one. But lastly, when it comes to, I'm just irritated by his use of the term sensibilities. He says,
that's that gaslighting again.
I'm gaslit, bro. I'm lit up. He says This offends the sensibilities of believers who can only place God in the category of needing no cause and having life within himself, and they are unwilling to grant the same quality to virtual particles of dark energy from which the universe might have sprung. Here's the thing, bro. It's not that it offends the sensibilities of us believers. I'm saying these people who are seriously engaged by this. Maybe there are some believers out there, who would be offended at their sensibility level. But here's the thing, like, let's let's not just leave the conversation there, right? The issue is, it's not about that we're unwilling to grant the same to this sense of being uncaused or having life within himself. It's not that we're unwilling. It's not just a matter of the will or sensibilities that we don't extend that to virtual particles. The issue is that when you look at these virtual particles that you're talking about at the quantum level, the quantum fields are unstable. You know what I'm saying? They're constantly in flux. They're constantly changing, right? Now, here's the thing. Anything that's in flux or changing, once you interchange into the equation, then you have time, because you can measure the time between one state of affairs and a successive state of affairs, some state of affairs that happens later. So if at the quantum level you have something that you have a change going on, that state of affairs is not changeless. Therefore, it cannot be said to be timeless. All right. But here's the thing. If the beginning of the universe is, we're talking about, by universe, we mean time, space, matter, and energy. I'm saying that's what folks are talking about, where they're talking about the universe, time, space, matter, and energy. The cause of the universe has to be timeless. It's got to be outside time. But if it's timeless, that implies that it's also changeless. Okay. But if the particles, the virtual particles and quantum, whatever's going on at the quantum level is not timeless and changeless, then it doesn't meet the criteria of the kind of things that would be responsible, or at least very least logically prior to the universe. And so, no, the reason why we're not going to grant the virtual particles this notion of being like that cause is not because it's a sensibility issue. It's not an unwillingness issue. Is that they don't meet the criteria for the kinds of things that would fit the description of a cause of the universe, because they're not changeless and they're not timeless. And so when he says it's a sensibility issue or is unwilling, maybe it's just him being a wordsmith or whatever, and wording it that way. But the bottom line is it's a kind of like downplaying it's essentially downplaying the theist case. I don't want to say that it's intellectually dishonest. I'm trying to avoid saying that, but it's
not smart.
Doing a disservice. It's doing a disservice to those with whom you're trying to get pushback. I'm saying it's not an intellectually honest way to engage in the other side, right? You want to engage with people who are actually arguing for, as opposed to relegating everybody on this side of the equation, i.e. as apologists, believers, or whatever, into just those who are offended based upon sensibilities. There's much more to say about it than sensibilities, and he neglects to do so, right? And I think that's just another, misstep from a scholarly standpoint. I think it's sloppy. I think he owes his readers more than that. All right, now I'm done. I had to get that out.
That was good, man. Look, you should become a philosopher. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also back to what we said earlier, understanding the difference between a mechanistic explanation and a personal explanation, right? I mean, you said something is in time, it changes, it's a part of reality, and then we asking the question what gave rise to reality itself. So.
There it is, man. All right. Well, that being said, now we're finally going to have some final words, man. I would encourage people to continue checking out this series, man. Go check out BK and Chris Samuel on BK Apologetics channel. Go check out Alex McElroy's channel, where he did a piece on this book. Eli Ayala was a part of the conversation over there to reveal Apologetics. And then join us, man, for part 2 and maybe 3, 4, and 5. I don't know, like on MJ Jackson's channel, where we continue to address chapter 13. It's kind of reminds me of LeBron James, where they asked him, remember he went to Miami, they were asking him, how many championships can y'all win? He was like, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not however. That's how we're gonna be with chapter 13. We got so many corrections to make. We can't do just one episode. It was not 1, not 2, not 3. we might have to go 4 or 5 on it, man. I don't know. Maybe we'll just do 1 episode per argument that he addresses or something like that, and just run it like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Christians and unbelievers deserve better, and that's what we're trying to do. Is give them the whole picture, and
Right.
I just want my final words is like when I'm reading a book that's designed to try to move me to a different position. I want to know if you at least interact with the best that scholarship has to offer, right? And in looking at this chapter so far, we don't see him interacting with the William Lane Craigs or the Alexander Proust. We don't see him interacting with the. He probably wouldn't even. I'm gonna be nice, but a lot of folks wouldn't even. They know that we have the William Lane Craigs out there, but they haven't heard of the Josh Rasmussen's. Can I grab a book real quick?
Yeah. Do your thing, man. Yeah, do your thing.
I'm gonna grab a book real quick.
Yeah. Please. And while you're doing that, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of folks that we got out here who are making some solid arguments, rather, putting out some solid work with respect to theistic arguments. And I do think it's strange, that he doesn't, particularly on a cosmological argument, where there's a bunch that he could interact with. He doesn't. He doesn't really do so. And to your point, MJ, if I were to try to make a case against the Kalam, I'm not pulling no Lawrence Krauss, dog. Like that's bottom of the barrel. I mean, whether you're a Christian or not, you know what I'm saying, regardless of who you are, serious atheists are not going to be appealing to Lawrence Krauss to make their case. You know what I'm saying? And if you do, then that suggests to me that you're not well versed, you're not well read with respect to the material relevant to the argument. That's what it suggests to me. Because if you were well read with respect to the material relevant to the argument, then you would have pulled from better sources to contend against it. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and even to your point, I mean, I would be looking for the Graham Oppies or the Alex Malpasses.
Sure.
If I was going to try to, source my material, but even then, I mean, we got a book like this, two dozen or so arguments for God, right? Mm-hmm. Oxford Press. Mm-hmm. No discussions. No allowing the Christians to put the argument in their own words. No interaction, really, with anything that the Christian has said. I mean, Brady has to make the argument for us. In my own academic work in school, I at least tried to. I think it gives more credibility to your paper when you at least try and deal with actual sources from people that you disagree with, and not try to knock down straw men or caricatures.
Right.
So, maybe this book can be revised. I hope this brother would.
Second. You're gonna hit that second edition quick.
I would hope that this brother would wake up and snap out of it, but maybe a revision perhaps, but we still have a lot of stuff to clean up in terms of the argument, and they don't get no better.
Nah, it doesn't, man. Here's the thing, man, and I'm glad you said that, because that'll help me to calm down and transition out of here. But as far as this session, but here's the thing, right? To me, this is barbershop talk. You know what I mean? Like, we talk aggressive, we talk forcefully, we talk passionately. But at the end of the day, man, I got love for Brady, man. I hope that cat turns to the Lord, bro. I really do. I really do, man. And I think that in some ways, even though I guess my angst comes from the fact that he's taking his that he's pushing this material to the world in such a way that it can negatively impact folks. You know what I mean? And it's done in such a way that I think it's done poorly, with respect to these arguments that we're dealing with here in this portion, chapter 13. But man, I want him to turn to Christ, bro. Like, I really do. You know what I mean? I hope that to me, it seems like there's some missteps and some holes in his studies where he's missed some spots. And he's like, you missed a spot, bro. And I'm hoping that maybe he'll go back to the spots that he's missed, rather than just dig in his heels, and just say, well, maybe I'm too far gone or something like that, or, or whatever. I hope he doesn't dig in his heels and just, just continue to rebel against, the truth. I mean, and actually, I won't even use the word truth here. Let's just don't rebel against arguments on the basis of insufficient analysis of them. You know what I'm saying? Let's just leave it there, right? I hope he goes back and does his homework, and just at least takes some honest consideration of the spaces that he's missed. You know what I mean? Yeah, and prayerfully repent, man. I hope
Amen.
Get some stuff right, bro. I really do.
Amen.
Well, but yeah, man, I'm glad you came out. Yeah, go ahead. What you say?
I was just saying it's a pleasure.
Always.
I just want to point out, we are continuing to do a series on this. You're gonna be coming on my channel. We could rotate back to your channel, blase. But also I'm gonna be reaching out because once again, that darn vocab is the culprit behind a lot of this. Right. So that Italian brother reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to tackle a few more chapters?" I'm just like, "Yeah."
Okay, well, all right.
I will be reaching out to Nick Quint and Colin CMB, the ambassador.
Okay.
And we're gonna probably also somewhere down the line deal with his chapter on revisionist prophecy because it seemed like Brady is the gift that keeps on giving if you're a Christian YouTuber.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, man. And I mean, I read the book, man. Like it's like I'm not trying to take him out of context. I'm not trying to piecemeal some sort of argument together based upon only halfway looking at his work. I read the book. I keyed in on the aspects that are of interest to me the most, which just happen to be the philosophical side because that's just where my interests lie. And I'm quoting the man, showing his works, and just showing where he's made some missteps. And it's to the point where I think that I mentioned this in the previous video. Like when I see mistakes like these, then I lose confidence in the author in terms of their ability to make a coherent case for whatever it is they're trying to make a case for. It doesn't really matter whether it's theistic or not. It's just these are the kind of red flags that suggest to me that I'm not dealing with a work that is solid enough, particularly to make a life decision to walk away from God, the God of Christianity, at least, if I was going to do it, it certainly wouldn't be on the grounds of what I find in Let There Be Gaslight. It's just, I certainly wouldn't. Anyway, much love, man. We're going to get up out of here, bro. Y'all know what it is, man. Definitely check me out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you feel so inclined, support your brother at patreon.com/Adam Coleman. You know what it is, man. We love God, love people. Take care of things that God blesses you with. Peace.